Hello everyone, this will be chapter 45 of The Second Life of the Guardian, written and read by Insect Overlord. This chapter is titled, Grief is an Ever-Shifting Cloud of Rain, and has content warnings for animal death, grief, and guilt. Izuku's fish died on a Saturday morning in May. His mom told him she had lived a long, happy life, and on an intellectual level, he knew that was true. Fish had lived for almost 4 years. As far as betta fish go, she was pretty old. That didn't make him feel any better, though. He noticed that morning when he woke up. She wasn't swimming, just sort of floating listlessly at the top of her tank. When he got out of bed to look closer, she hadn't moved. He hadn't fully understood. Didn't want to understand at first. He called her name and dropped some food in the water. Nothing. Then the dreaded thought crossed his mind. What if she's dead? In his panic-riddled state, he did the first thing he thought of. He used his quirk. Without paying attention to what summoned, he released it from existence and prayed to Gami his fish would be okay. She stayed floating, beautiful, delicate, quiet. He used his quirk again and again and again, all while knowing deep down that it wouldn't do anything. A quirk hadn't killed her, it was just her time to go. He didn't know why he was so distraught. He hadn't begged the Kwami for his parents when he realized they were long gone, while he was still here, living a new life without them. He hadn't cried into his mom's shirt like he was now, wishing he was hugging his mama instead. But his memories of his mama and papa were tied to the destruction and pain and everything he hated about his past life. Fish was different. She was more than a betta. She represented festival food, Eraserhead, and the kindness of strangers. She wasn't afraid when he had a meltdown or a nightmare. She was just there. She didn't care that he was broken. Izuku pushed himself slowly on the swing. After he and his family had buried fish in the yard, he had left for the park to clear his head. He loved his family, but he didn't want to listen to his dad suggest they get a new fish, just like he knew he would. He didn't understand that she wasn't replaceable like that. The sky was overcast, but it wasn't set to rain until that afternoon. The incoming clouds changed the ordinarily vibrant colors of the playground to a dull monotone. The park was unusually empty for the time of day, its occupants all settled indoors. Perhaps that's why the lone person on the bench across from him stood out so starkly. He was a young adult, with a tall, angular frame. He wore a fedora and had an oddly French aura about him. Izuku didn't know what was setting off his French sensors, because the man looked and dressed Japanese. Maybe he spent some time as an exchange student? Disregarding his usual apprehension of strangers, Izuku went to sit beside him. Misery loves company and all that. "Are you all right?" he asked. Now that he could see his face better, Izuku noted the man looked even more upset than he was. The man furrowed his brow. "Where are your parents, kid?" "Right." That was a pretty reasonable response to a random 7-year-old talking to you out of nowhere. Izuku shrugged. "I'm here by myself, but my parents know where I am." He tacked on the last part out of caution. He was not trying to get kidnapped again. The man sighed. "Don't worry about me. I'm just missing someone." "Me too," he sympathized, swinging his legs slowly. "My fish, she died today." He resisted tearing up again at the admittance. "I see. I'm sorry." Izuku shrugged. It wasn't his fault. "I lost someone very dear to me. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye," he said blandly as he stared off into the distance. A small moth flew off a nearby tree and landed on his knuckle, where it rested on his knee. He brought his hand up to look at the creature, and it gently flapped its wings twice before flying off. "That's all I want, just to see her one more time. Apologize for leaving so suddenly." Izuku nodded. He felt the same way about Fish. "I tried to use my quirk to save her, but it didn't work. I wish it had. There has to be some kind of quirk that can help. In this world, everyone has superpowers. One of them has to work, the man said. He sounded both convinced and skeptical, like he knew it wasn't feasible, but hoped it was anyway. I mean, it could be possible, I guess. Izuku humored him. Contemplating the what-ifs helped with the grieving process, right? There are time-related quirks, like Sir Nide has. Maybe there's something out there that can let us see them one last time. He hoped there was. Maybe, the man muttered. The man started again, hesitant. If someone offered you a chance to get back what you had lost, would you take it? Yes, he answered immediately. What if there was a steep price? He pressed. Izuku thought back, not just to his fish, but to how he felt when his dad disappeared. If his dad had actually died, if his charm hadn't worked, what would he do? To what lengths would Izuku go to save those he loved? I don't know, he admitted. The man nodded and tilted his face towards the sky. The two sat together as the heavens began to drizzle, grieving those they lost and wishing for another chance. Her bug wouldn't admit it, but they were becoming depressed. They were trying to ignore their grief, but death wasn't something that could be forgotten so easily. Tikki had observed the lives of many humans. She could tell these things. Come on, they would love to see you again, I'm sure of it, she tried convincing her partner, gracefully avoiding obstacles as she walked backwards through a busy plaza in Italy. She had taken the form of a small child, one with much growing to do and full of creative potential. She expected this talk would be easier if he could see her expression, even if he could feel her emotions through their bond regardless. Sometimes it was simply nice to change her form. It helped her to remember she wasn't shackled to one body anymore. Plagg rolled his eyes, burying his hands in his hoodie pockets. They don't want to see me, he grumbled. They don't blame you, you know, she said, cupping his face between her hands, heedless of the bodies bustling around them. It's not like they could understand their words if the gods didn't want them to. They aren't so shallow as to place the fault of your holder onto your shoulders. Plagg hissed and bared his fangs, ears lying flat on his hood as his tail swished behind him. I told them to trust him. I thought he would change. Ethereal tears pricked at the edges of his eyes. Tikki wiped them away with her thumbs, absorbing them into her skin. If they fell to the earth, it would weep with the god of destruction, and the ground would cry out to match his pain. Tell me this, Kitty. She laid her forehead against his own. Do you blame Nuru for what their holders have done? The pain they've caused? Of course not, he shouted, the sound accompanying a crash of thunder as the skies began to pour in solitude. The streets quickly cleared of people, but the gods remained, and the rain did not touch them. Do you think the child blames him? She pushed. Plagg hesitated, but didn't break eye contact or pull away. No, they aren't like that, he admitted. Then why? Tikki tilted her head, eyes widening almost unnaturally. Would they blame you? They stood together as the rain slowed, staring into each other's eternal souls and breathing air they didn't need. Come, Tikki beckoned, holding out an unmarred palm. Plagg placed his hand into her own. Together, the two shifted into their preferred forms and headed out of the city. As they walked, the landscape morphed around them, and the buildings stretched taller. Sooner than should be possible, they arrived outside a window. Don't keep them waiting, Tikki nudged. Her bug was in pain, but she knew she wasn't who they needed. He acted tough, but Plagg was always better at comforting children. Izuku turned his head when he heard a tapping sound on the glass outside his window. The sky outside was dark, the light of his bedroom washing out whatever was there. He squinted and got up from his bed to get a better look, but just as he placed his book down, the form of a black cat phased through the glass. He didn't hesitate. Although he hadn't seen him in almost 300 years, his soul recognized the Kwami and called out to him. Plagg! he cried, throwing himself at the god. "Hey, Kit," he said, rolling his eyes. "It's been a while." Izuku mumbled, burying his face in his fur. Carefully, he picked the cat up and cradled him in his arms. He knew Plagg probably didn't like being treated like an actual cat, but Izuku couldn't help himself. If Plagg didn't want to be snuggled, he should have picked a different form. "Why did you only come to see me now?" he asked, not lifting his head. Plagg began to purr and nuzzled his face. I'm sorry. I thought you wouldn't want to see me after what I did." Izuku's brows furrowed, and he lifted his head to look at the Kwami's downcast expression. "You didn't do anything wrong, though." He tilted his head in confusion. Then his eyes widened. "Wait, do you mean the Adrian stuff? Plagg, none of that was your fault," he admonished, genuinely stunned anyone could think otherwise. The Kwami let out a sigh before grumbling. "You and Tikki are so much alike." Izuku giggled. "Whatever," he dismissed, leaping gracefully out of Izuku's arms and onto his bed. "An annoying someone told me you needed a little cheering up." Izuku pouted and sat on his bed beside him. "I do not. I'm doing just fine, thank you." "Right." Plagg pretended to agree, before bounding towards the door, tail swishing mischievously. "I guess that means you don't want to go shred every pair of pants your dad owns." Izuku blinked for a few seconds, before a huge grin spread across his face. "You know what? I think that's a great idea." This concludes chapter 45 of The Second Life of the Guardian. As of this point, I don't remember if I've said before, but I have the entire story outlined already, and it's going to be about 200,000 words. As of the current chapter that's posted, which I think is 48, there's 80,000 words, so we're almost halfway there, and as of how far I've written, I'm very close to getting to the main plot start of the story. Not the first plot point of canon, but the first plot point of the main plot of the story, if that makes sense. We're pretty much finished with the beginnings world building. That being said, the next chapter should be up soon. Thank you so much for listening.